why should, Joe Schmo down the street have to pay taxes in order to heal my arm because I voluntarily chose to get in a fist fight with somebody?
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Clair.
Welcome back, my Liberty lefties, to another edition of Lions of Liberty, your home for great conversations about, yes, that's right, the ideas of liberty. This is the 247th episode of this program, which means that you can find today's show notes featuring links to everything we discuss over at lionsofliberty.com/247. And if you are a fan of this program, there are a couple other libertarian podcasts out there that I know you guys are going to love. You've got to check out Roger Paxton's Lava Flow podcast, the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, and of course, our friend Chris Spangle and the We Are Libertarians podcast. Check them all out. My guest today is an MMA fighter based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. He's also a very outspoken libertarian. That's how he got on this program. I'm pleased to welcome Mitch Twizzler Bones Thompson. Mitch, my man, are you ready to roar?
Well, but first off, how fitting is it that you have a professional MMA fighter on the Lions of Liberty podcast?
Exactly.
I feel like I should be introducing you like, hey, Mark, welcome to Lions of Liberty podcast. I'm your guest, Mitch Thompson. Are you?
Well, I'm always ready, man. This is why I do this show, because I like to get in there and roar about liberty. And I know you roar yourself, because I've seen a couple of your fights now. I tracked a couple of them down on YouTube, and you kind of got I don't know how to say it. You're a wily son of a gun.
Yeah, I like to roll around, do a couple fightings every now and then.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes across watching your fighting is, obviously you're trying to win a fight, but it comes across you're kind of trying to have some fun in there. Would you say that's accurate?
I'm always trying to have fun. My walkout song is actually "Now You're a Man." If you've ever seen Orgasmo from Matt Stone and Trey Parker back in like the 90s, essentially just a song where saying, "Now are you man? Are you man? Manny man, man." So, I'm always having fun in there.
Well, that's great, man, because no matter what you do in life, even if it's something like fighting, which a lot of people might not think is fun, it's important to be having fun doing it, and that's why I do the show, too, because I have fun having these conversations about the ideas of liberty. So I don't think I could really start off this interview any other way than by asking you about your nickname, Twizzler Bones. Where did that nickname come from? What's it all about?
So when I first moved here to Utah, about in, I think it was like 2012, I was fighting this kid, and he was getting me in all these arm bars and these triangles and stuff, and I was just getting out of them just like nothing. The very end of the round, he catches me in an arm bar, and my arm is bending back like 220 degrees, and I'm just smiling, giving a thumbs up to everybody, and everybody's like screaming, and then the bell goes off, and everyone thinks my arm's broken. I'm like, no, I'm good to go, and it choked him out in the next round. So,
they tried to stop the fight, thinking your arm was actually broken?
No, the round was over, and so back to our corner, and then the ref came and he made sure that my arm wasn't broken. Like, oh no, I'm good to go.
Did that even hurt at that point, or do you just have some uncanny ability to have your bones bend further than most people?
I didn't even realize. Had I known it was bending back that far, I probably would have, addressed it a little bit more. Right. But I had no idea that, I had this weird bone bending ability. People try to put me in arm bars all the time, and arm bars aren't even things on me anymore.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good skill to have in your line of work here.
Yeah, for sure.
So why don't we tick back the clock a little bit? Why don't you just tell us? We'll get into your ideas about libertarianism and how you got into that stuff in a bit. But I kind of want to learn a little bit more about your fighting career and how you got into MMA in the first place.
Well, I grew up wrestling. I've been wrestling my whole life. I wrestled in college and everything in high school. And then when I was probably about freshman, sophomore in high school, I started watching The Ultimate Fighter on TV and started getting really into MMA, and then became a hardcore fan. And that's basically all I do now is fight.
That's awesome, man. So you were just hooked right away. You kind of already had that instinct in you from your wrestling days. The idea of that kind of fierceness of competition, is that what kind of drives you?
Absolutely. Fighting, it's similar to wrestling in the sense of the competition aspect, but the fighting it's just so much more when you add in the jiu-jitsu aspect and the kickboxing, the Muay Thai and all that. It's so much more than wrestling was. I really quickly adapted into it.
So as I was mentioning, I watched a couple of your fights before the show here, and I saw so one of them was actually, I think I watched your last amateur fight, which I believe was against a guy named Weston Wilson, and your first pro fight, which was against a guy named Jordan Marriott. And both of those fights you finished with a chokehold. I believe it was like a rear naked choke. You can correct me if I don't have the term correct, but is that your favorite move? Is that your go-to finisher, or did I just happen to catch two fights where you used it?
No, actually, that is kind of my thing. That last fight with Weston Wilson was actually the one where I got my nickname Twizzler Bones, if you remember.
Oh, it's that fight, right, at the end with the bones.
That fight, yeah.
It's all making sense now, because the video is actually titled The Origin of Twizzler Bones, and we'll link to that in the show notes for this program.
So, yeah, I mean, that's rear naked choke's definitely my thing. I've finished maybe like 18, 19 fights with the rear naked choke, so definitely my go-to move there.
Awesome. So when did you actually make your fighting debut, and then when and how, I guess, did you ascend to a pro level?
I made my amateur debut in April of 2009. I had started training back in like 2007, and I wasn't 18 yet, and my parents wouldn't let me fight until I turned 18. So I turned 18 in March and had my first fight in April. That fight was actually, I ended up knocking him out in like 13 seconds.
That's not a bad debut.
It was very, very good.
Must have helped the confidence to start off by just knocking the guy out that quick.
So quick and so easy. Had no idea. But I mean, I was hooked since then. And my pro debut, I made it in. I'm from Idaho. I was fighting out in Idaho for a few years, and I eventually decided that I needed to take this career more seriously, and decided to move down here to Salt Lake City, where Jeremy Horn is, and Jeremy Horn's my trainer. And I moved down here in 2012. And I think I made my pro debut with him in 2013. I had about 9 amateur fights with him in just that 1 year. Then I ended up turning pro against Jordan Marriott in May 2013, which was Jordan Marriott, who was 4-0 when I first fought him as a pro. He had finished all his guys in the first round, so we knew it was going to be a tough fight, but I ended up choking him out in the first round. So
just like that. So you have a knack for debuting pretty well, huh?
All my debuts have worked out real great.
All right. So I'm curious, like I said, I wrestled in high school, and even when I felt pretty confident, I mean, obviously my first few matches, I just wasn't that good, I wasn't Twizzler Bones, I didn't come firing out of the gates winning my debuts, but, eventually I got a lot better, but even when I got to a certain level of confidence, I still had a little bit of butterflies before a match. So, and that was when I knew nobody was going to punch me in the face or try to break my arm or any of the stuff that you have to go through, the possibilities of anyway, when you're stepping into I don't know if it's an octagon you're always in, but when you step into that fight. So how do you kind of prepare yourself? How do you get into the right mindset that you need to be into to really let loose and have fun with it? And, just get yourself in the right mode.
Well, I mean, it's a lot. It's a few different things. It's obviously you're going to be nervous for every fight, regardless of what you try to do. I know, like I said before, I always try to have fun in my walkouts. I'm always dancing around. I actually wear these rainbow tights in my fights these days. They're like they've got like rainbows all over them, like what Peter Pan would wear. Almost.
Do you think that has any kind of like psychological effect on your opponents? Do you think they're just thinking, well, what's wrong with this guy? What's this guy with the rainbow pants? And does it, you think, in any way distracts them? I mean, do you get distracted by things like that if people do have kind of quirky moves in the ring or wear a weird outfit? I always wonder what the mindset of a fighter is, or if you're just really able to focus on the fight at hand.
I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I think a lot of people are head cases out there, and any little thing will throw them off their game. I know in my last fight, I was on top of the guy, and I was right in his corner. And his corner was yelling at me like, "Hey, Mitch, will it bother you if I lick your ear right now?" Like, "Oh, please lick my ear."
Are there any rules against that kind of thing? I mean, I guess it sounds like fair game. It's just kind of messing with you, but I don't know. I feel like in a professional fight, like in the UFC, that might be like they might stop somebody from doing that. Maybe I'm wrong.
It actually happens all the time.
Really?
It doesn't really affect anybody really, but people like to think it does.
Right.
So
doesn't affect Twizzler Bones, huh?
Doesn't affect no Twizzler Bones.
All right. So as I mentioned, obviously we first kind of came into contact because you started your own Facebook page. I think it's called the Libertarian Fighter. Do I have that right? And just to kind of put your ideas out there and get some conversation going. So first of all, how did you first get interested in libertarian ideas? What got you to the point where you wanted to be kind of publicly outspoken about your political beliefs?
To be honest, it was South Park that got me into libertarianism. Back when I was going to college, I was really in college just to wrestle. I wasn't really there for learning, which is not the best idea. I don't recommend that to anybody. But, I started watching a lot of South Park back then. I started looking to Ron Paul. I started reading Rothbard back then. And, it's essentially evolved quite a bit since then. I wasn't really all that politically active until probably recently, until Bernie Sanders started popping up and all these horrible socialist ideas that people just don't seem to understand how they're not going to benefit anybody.
And did that really just drive you nuts, suddenly seeing all these Bernie Sanders memes pop up and just people listing all the promises and all the wonderful things that they just, I guess, thought could just be magically produced by the government, and with all the knowledge that you'd gotten over the years and all the thought you put into this stuff, it just made you go, oh no, I can't just sit here and watch this drivel go on.
You just can't let it happen. Like, you can't let people think that, like, this is going to be prosperous and that this is how we're going to grow our economy and get, actually help people out and actually get people higher paying jobs. Like, this is not how a free market works.
Even though you disagree with the solutions presented by Bernie Sanders and the people that support him, I mean, do you in any way kind of see where they're coming from, in the sense that we do clearly have a very rigged economy? We have a system that does find a lot of people being kind of shut out of work in many ways. So, I mean, for me personally, I'm with you. I think that these solutions presented are not good ones, but I'm not surprised, I guess I should say, considering all the things we've seen in our government over the years. I'm not surprised that this kind of movement can spring up when somebody is coming along, pointing out injustice in some way, and then making a bunch of promises, which, well, I mean, they're easy to say, but they're a lot more difficult to deliver in reality.
Yeah, I mean, like, I do get where they're coming from. Most people who are progressives, they want to help people, they want to make a better place, but then none of them have done any of the research, and they're just being told, hey, just more government is going to help all our problems. This is going to solve your issue here. It's going to solve your issue here. And none of them seem to even care about the economic side of it. It's all about, helping out the people, stealing money from this group of people and giving them to other groups of people through various different types of programs.
What would you actually kind of tell a progressive person who maybe a friend of yours or something like that, who might be having this conversation with you and putting these ideas out, but you see them as an honest person, like you just said, you think that they mean well. So what kind of arguments do you actually use to try to sway them and say, like, I get where you're coming from, but this is not the way to go?
Well, I mean, essentially, a lot of them are into the free healthcare, the universal healthcare. And I always ask them, do you believe that that's going to make it cheaper? Because the government has never produced anything at a cheaper or higher quality than the free market has.
And you could use yourself as an argument against universal health care. Be like, hey man, I'm a fighter. I don't think you should have to pay if I get my arm broken in the ring.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the one who's voluntarily choosing to go into that fight. Like, why should, Joe Schmo down the street have to pay taxes in order to heal my arm because I voluntarily chose to get in a fist fight with somebody?
Right, and to me, that's really no different than if you got injured because you went skiing or you went snowboarding. I mean, when everyone is quote unquote covered by this supposedly benevolent force, it's going to get overused because there's no risk evaluation involved. All those calculations just go off the table because, hey, it's paid for, right?
Yeah, I mean, people don't seem to really care. When you take the actual cost out of something, people don't usually care nearly as much as like how much they're going to use it. So obviously, if healthcare is free, I'm going to be much more careless with how I'm treating my body, what I'm putting in my body as far as nutrition wise, and as far as like actual risky decisions.
I'm actually kind of curious now that we're talking about it. What is the healthcare situation with a fighter like yourself? Do you have to purchase your own healthcare? And if so, does the fact that you are an MMA fighter make that more difficult? Do you have to pay higher rates because of a theoretically risky activity that you're participating in?
I actually have a full-time job as a cabinet maker as well, and I usually just get my insurance through them.
Gotcha.
But the actual fight promotions will provide insurance as well. The state athletic commission makes them do that.
Okay, so if anything were to happen in an actual fight, you would be covered through that.
Yes.
Well, let's use that as a nice segue, because I really want to talk to you about these state athletic commissions. Now, I mean, I know I don't know how many other libertarian fighters you know. I don't know how much politics is even discussed. I mean, I listen to Joe Rogan. He's not exactly a libertarian, but he has a lot of thoughts about this stuff. But he does seem to think that these commissions are necessary. He just, thinks some of them are abusive in their kind of how they operate. But I mean, when you look at a guy like Nick Diaz, who gets suspended for 5 years by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, essentially for smoking some marijuana, which as far as I know is really not a performance enhancer in any way. To me, it seems like there is at least a massive abuse going on in some circumstances. So what's your thoughts on these athletic commissions overall?
I mean, isn't it such a joke that people think that marijuana is a performance enhancing drug?
It boggles my mind.
I would love if everybody I ever fought was on marijuana.
Right?
They just came into the cage just completely stoned out of their mind. It would be the best.
Please, oh please, eat this brownie before we fight. That would be wonderful.
But I mean, no, I'm strongly against athletic commissions. I don't think they serve any purpose. The athletic commissions essentially oversee all combat sports, which is boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, any sport that requires punching and kicking. But you see, why does combat sports need a athletic commission over it, where no other sports have a government regulated athletic commission? Why is combat sports different? Where you compare football to athletic sports, football is actually significantly more dangerous. You see much more brain damage in football than boxing and MMA. So why are we putting this on mixed martial arts and not on football?
You're playing into this theory that I've always had, and it's just a theory because I'm not a doctor or a scientist or any of that stuff. But I mean, to me, in MMA, the fact that you do not have a helmet on, you do not have you do have some hand covering, but they're not boxing gloves on. It basically ensures that no one can really do massive damage to each other because you just can't use your fist on a head like in that way, And there's consequence. There's a certain amount of kind of force you have to put into things, whereas in football where you have a helmet, in boxing where some boxing has a helmet but some doesn't, but all boxing pretty much has these giant boxing gloves. People are just wailing away on each other and just beating each other's brains in. So I mean, do you see any legitimacy to my theory there? That, I mean, you seem to be, because that you're stating these are known to be more dangerous sports, but I think the perception out there is that combat sports are far more dangerous, when if you actually look at death rates, and I mean, I don't even know if there's been a death in combat sports that I can think of, but I've seen a boxing death this year, so I mean, I know those occur.
Yeah, there's been a few in boxing. They'll have on boxing every year, but MMA is, I think since MMA became a sport back in 1993, I think we've had like maybe 12 deaths in the entire 25-year history. Where in boxing there's probably 50 a year, and football is just astronomical.
I mean, especially if you take into account the deaths in football that come years later, and the problems that come years later. I mean, we've seen so many NFL players now. We've seen people commit suicide, and that's really been recently, thanks to a lot of more research that's been going into this. That's being attributed to taking massive concussions, taking repeated hits, blows to the head over and over and over a period of years. So, for people that just don't maybe understand the sport as well, can you just describe why that's not nearly the kind of danger in MMA? Why not having these giant gloves it might seem to a lot of people that having these giant gloves protects people more, but why is that not the case?
Well, you see in MMA, obviously there's the grappling aspect involved, and so like in boxing, the only goal is to punch each other. Right. In MMA, I'm going to try to take you down. I'm going to try to pass guard. I'm going to try to get a submission on you. And when you compare it to like football, you play football 16 weeks in a row for 5-6 months straight all the way through, where I'm fighting, I'm only fighting, 3-4 times a year, 15 minutes at a time. I'm not playing these 4-hour football games where I'm repeatedly getting smashed by these entire huge bodies trying to just, cripple me. I think people get misjudged on combat sports because the goal is obviously to hurt the other person, where, in football, the goal is to just throw a ball, run across the end zone.
That's an interesting take because, in football, while people take much harder hits, it's not the point of the game. It's just something that happens in the game and is a part of the game. Whereas in MMA, that's actually is the actual stated goal, to hurt somebody to get to victory. So I guess on the surface, I could see how people would think that, just if they're not thinking about it too deeply. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, in fighting, it's obviously a very dangerous sport. I mean, nobody's trying to pretend it's not.
Right.
But the injuries in fighting are very, very minuscule. I've never had a fight where I've had to go to the hospital or I've had like some kind of significant injury. I mean, the worst thing I'll ever get is a cut.
Well, Mitch, I'm not quite done with you yet, but we do need to take a minute out to hear a quick word from today's sponsors.
Hey guys, this is Roger Paxton, and if you're fed up with the government running every single aspect of your life, but you're not listening to the Lava Flow podcast yet, then what's wrong with you? Check us out at thelavaflow.com, or just go back to sucking up to the government. The Lava Flow podcast, striking the root every single episode.
This is Chris Spangle, and I am the host of We Are Libertarians, which you can find in iTunes, Google Play, or at wearelibertarians.com. We are a podcast that brings you all of the irreverence that modern politics deserves by examining current events from a libertarian perspective. So please, check us out at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey everyone, the Johnny Rocket Launchpad is Liberty. Each week we strive to bring you the best guests in talk radio. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad delivers weekly interviews of noteworthy politicians, experts, and activists. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is bringing the party to the Libertarian Party and launching ideas in your direction. Check us out at johnnyrocketlaunchpad.com, and you can hear me, Kurt Nelson, and the beautiful Heather Nixon talk about the ideas of liberty. Rock and roll.
Do you think that that's kind of why these athletic commissions exist, but then just because of the public perception, which then, kind of, finds its way into the government area of things, and then they say, well, these are more dangerous sports, despite the lack of evidence for that, and therefore we have to have these very special commissions to oversee them?
Well, actually, we have an athletic commission because Anheuser-Busch bought them. Back in like 97, Anheuser-Busch was the main sponsor of boxing, of the major boxing events. And the MMA was starting to pick up, and they saw this as a threat because they didn't want people to switch over to MMA and start watching that instead of boxing. So what they did is they bought John McCain, everybody's favorite politician, good old King Neocon, John McCain. And he essentially went on this whole long, 3 or 4 year spree of just trying to get MMA banned and just saying that it's human cockfighting, just having no information on it whatsoever. It essentially got all the state athletic commission, all the states to ban mixed martial arts except for Nevada and New Jersey. Nevada and New Jersey were the only ones to keep it around because he got them to put in place the state athletic commissions.
I never knew that whole story. I never knew the relation of Anheuser-Busch to this whole thing. So basically, they wanted to shut out the competition, and that they seem to have successfully done so in most of the country, huh?
Yeah, I mean, every state except I think Montana has a state athletic commission now. So, and if you go try to fight in Montana, they'll ban you from, or not ban you, but they'll put you on a suspension for fighting in a non-commissioned sanctioned area. So that's kind of how they control the whole market. They don't let people go fight wherever they want. You have to fight in the ABC approved commission.
Wow. So you mentioned John McCain there, and I saw you post a little rant about the Ali Act recently, and I believe he was a proponent of that, or may even be a proponent of this new version that they're putting forward. But basically, they're trying to, first of all, actually, could you describe what the Ali Act is, and then tell people out there how they're trying to apply this to mixed martial arts?
Essentially, the Ali Act is just like a federal sanctioned body that, right now, all the state commissions are kind of their own entity. They answer a little bit to the ABC, which is the Association of Boxing Commissions, which is like the U.S. Athletic Commission, so they don't really do anything all that spectacular. But essentially, the Ali Act they're trying to put a federal commission over everything, so everybody has to obey by the same rules. Essentially, what they're trying to add is they're trying to get it so you can't sign with a promotion for more than 1 year. So say I go fight for the UFC. They are not going to allow me to sign a contract with the UFC for more than 1 year. There's a lot of fighters who don't even fight within a year when they first sign that contract.
Right.
So a lot of times you'll sign that contract with the UFC and you won't even get to use it, and the federal government will force you out of that contract before you ever even get to fight for them.
That seems so crazy. And what's the supposed benefit of this act then? I guess in theory it's supposed to be for the good of the fighters, but it doesn't seem like it really is.
Well, they don't want people locked up in contracts for 5-6 years. But I mean, if you're voluntarily choosing to sign into that contract, I mean, what authorities of the federal government tell you that you can't.
Like, so if a fighter happens to, they start off and they don't, they don't have that much of a record or reputation. So they sign a big, long deal and then they become, a huge deal, a huge fighter, and they want more money and they don't want them locked into this contract where they maybe make less than they think they should make for the last few years of that contract. Is that the idea?
Yes, that is the idea. They're trying to keep, they're trying to essentially open up the markets and get people to be able to fight, wherever they want. Essentially, the problem with that, like we see in boxing, is we get two or three huge stars because there's no promotion and nobody cares about the undercard fighters. The undercard fighters get paid significantly less in boxing than they do than the main card fighters. Like essentially, Floyd Mayweather when he fought Pacquiao made, I think it was like $180 million, where the undercard fighters made about $20,000.
Wow.
I mean, that's a significant difference.
And you think that the Ali Act actually contributes to that?
Yes, because the promotion can't get behind. Like, essentially, when you're watching MMA, a lot of times you're just like, people think the MMA is actually just the UFC. So people will be watching UFC because it's the UFC. In boxing, there's not that brand. There's like 60 different promotions, and people just know it as boxing. And so the promoters aren't willing to get behind the lower card guys as much to promote them so people know who they are. So there's less people know who they are, and obviously the less tickets they're going to sell, and the less money they're willing to pay them.
So that this Ali Act basically makes it so it gives them less incentive to actually promote these guys because they can only get them to these short-term contracts anyway. And if they build a guy up, then he'll probably just go somewhere else for more money. So why would they even want to invest that time in someone that they can't actually even invest in long-term if they want to?
Exactly, and then you get these huge superstars that take the entire portion of the payday, like Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, where nobody else really has a chance to really make their name.
And now they're trying to apply this same law, this same rule to mixed martial arts. Is that right?
Correct.
So who's behind the push for that? Because I mean, obviously, there's going to be different bodies in any sport that's going to favor this legislation, and if it comes forward, it's probably because someone out there is lobbying for it. So who do you think is behind the push for this?
I know John McCain's behind it a little bit. I mean, I don't think he's too terribly involved at this moment, but there's a senator out of a local senator out of Oklahoma. I don't remember his name, that really brought this up to everybody. He's been really pushing it the past couple of years. In the last 3 or 4 months, it's really started to pick up steam.
Well, luckily we got people like you out there. So does this cause conversation? I mean, like I said, I don't know how much political talk is there within other fighters. I mean, do you have this kind of conversation just based on kind of the stuff that affects you guys directly? Or, I mean, do you end up kind of broadening the scope at all? I mean, do you really get into Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard and that kind of stuff, with your fellow fighters?
I mean, I absolutely do. I mean, that's basically all I talk about when we're here in the gym. But I mean, most people aren't really all that politically involved. Most people are just typical meathead, just trying to do their sport, just trying to get in shape. But I mean, I'm always trying to get people to read Rothbard. I actually got Horn, my trainer, I got him to start reading Man Economy and State, so we'll see where that goes.
Oh boy. When's he gonna have time to train you, man? That's a steep one.
Yeah.
Just check out this 1,000-page tome and get back to me, man.
just let me know how it goes.
Well, that's cool, dude. I'm glad you're out there. I mean, obviously you're unabashedly talking about that stuff, and you're not a shy guy. I can tell that from seeing you in the ring and from seeing kind of your antics out there and your antics on social media. And I'm glad to see that you also apply that to your approach to politics and to not being shy about that either. So, Mitch, I want to encourage you to keep up the great work. Before I let you go, why don't you just give everybody out there an idea of where they can find some of your fights, where they can check out what you're going on, how they can follow you maybe on social media. Just give them the whole Twizzler Bones roundabout.
Yeah, you can add me as a friend on Facebook, just Mitch Thompson, or you can give my athletic page a like at facebook.com/Twizzler Bones. Add me on Twitter at Twizzler Bones, and I think it's at Twizzler Bones on Instagram as well.
All right, man. Mitch Twizzler Bones Thompson. Check him out if you're ever in the Salt Lake area. Maybe he'll be having a fight when you're there. If not, be sure to follow him because he's an interesting guy. He's got a lot to say. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mitch Twizzler Bones Thompson. I can't get over that nickname. It's just too cool. And it's really fun to be able to have some of my interests in life kind of converge sometimes. And when I found out that there was this guy, Mitch Thompson, this MMA fighter, who's also a liberty guy, well, I had to reach out. I had to have another great conversation about the ideas of liberty with this guy. I remember watching the first UFC back in the early 90s. Yep, I'm old, guys. I'm old. And it was so crazy back then, because back then you didn't even have weight classes. You just had you'd have a little skinny guy going up against a big fat guy. There were nowhere near the amount of rules and regulations related to it now. And I think a lot of the rules that UFC has instituted are good ones, and they're rules that they didn't really need the government coming in and telling them to make, because they became logical rules for the growth of the sport. But there's one thing we can be fairly certain of in today's day and age, and that is that if there's something out there that a lot of people tend to enjoy, whether it's smoking a joint or whether it's watching a couple of dudes punch each other in the face and try to bend their arms in weird ways, there's some busybody politician somewhere who's going to try to butt their nose in and get involved in it, and it really never seems to turn out too well. It's really funny when it comes to the subject of martial arts. I'll hear some people say, like, "Oh, you like martial arts? You like MMA? That sounds barbaric. I thought you were a libertarian. The non-aggression principle." Well, I don't live and die by the non-aggression principle. I do think that there are some problems with the sense of only explaining things in those terms. Although I do agree with the principle, you should not attack other human beings. But in a situation like this is two human beings who have both agreed we are going to enter into combat in the venue of a sporting event. And either of them can quit at any point in time. So to call this aggression, to try to tie this in with the non-aggression principle in any way, it's just plainly silly, really. And I think anybody that does so just really doesn't understand the concept or is just trolling. But I hope you guys did enjoy my conversation with Mitch Thompson and all the other great conversations I strive to continue bringing here directly to your earbuds each and every week, several times a week. And now I got to hand the baton off, because this Friday, we're going to hand things over to my man, John Odermatt, the host of the weekly Felony Friday. And of course, we'll get back to some more great conversations next week. So until then, folks, live long and live free.